This is Tony Cannuli. You have a brand new Google Hangout, Leadership Factory Hangout with my good friend Orrin Woodward, the host. This is we're on our actually several months here, fourth month I believe in doing the Hangouts, and this is the first one of the new year. I am super excited. We've got another phenomenal guest on, George Guzzardo, who's out in Arizona, somebody that's been friends with Orrin for over 20 years now. Phenomenal story, and Orrin will cover that story. For those of you that are listening in, the Google Factory Hangout, Leadership Factory Hangout, is a special hangout. It's an event that was created and started from the Home Business Radio Network, Positive Powered Radio. The audio from these hangouts is played on the network as well every single week, and we pray every time we do this to provide value and to bring amazing content to our listeners and our viewers there across the world. With that, I want to turn it over to my host, Orrin Woodward, a gentleman that I've become very good friends with, a gentleman that's one of the best authors. You're one of the best writers, speakers, orators, and the reason I can say that is because he started in this profession 20 years ago, and we were just talking about this, Orrin, about who you become as a process. And you know, that's one of the true truths of the network marketing profession is where you start is not where you end, and who you become. And you are a perfect example of that. I know all the books you've read. I know that you've been in living rooms and dens across America, and I am very proud, very privileged to have this time to be able to help people understand better this profession and talk about concepts and around leadership. And I'm super excited to have George Guzzardo on here on the Google Factory Hangout.
Thank you, Tony. You know, I am very excited. It's going to be a great 2013 for everybody listening in today. And you know, George and I go way back. You'd mentioned I've been in the home-based business for 20 years. Well, George has been in about a couple months later than me. I mean, he was one of the first people that really got into our business and stuck. And so he saw early Orrin, who isn't Orrin today. Of course, I also saw early George, who isn't the George today as well. But today he has an amazing lifestyle. He has thousands upon thousands of people attending seminars across the country. He's become not just a top leader, but also a top philosopher, a thinker, a doer, and just one of the most loyal guys you'll ever want to meet. And I'm really excited to have you on the call today, the Leadership Factory, George. And you know, just for everybody listening in, could you share a little bit of kind of what got you started in this crazy profession?
Well, first of all, I'm also honored to be on the call with both of you. We've been watching your shows over the last month and really enjoy the knowledge we've been gaining from them. So it really is an honor to be part of it tonight. As far as what got me started, I don't think I was looking or I thought I was looking for anything. I think what happens is maybe inside of us, we're looking and we don't even know it. And I kind of call it a pilot light. Sometimes that pilot light gets doused with the flame of a dream and it turns into a blaze. And sometimes it gets doused with water and it kind of smolders. And when I got started, mine was kind of smoldering. I had been in a physical therapy practice for close to, it was at 15 years at the time. And completely immersed in my practice and with another group of people, and that was our life. We had absolutely no time, coached a little bit on the side, and was not looking for any alternative sources of information at the time. And of course, Jill's brother and you worked together, and you guys both had some phenomenal success with the benchmarking award that you won in the automotive industry. And so I trusted Jill's brother. He had a lot of, I would say, respect from me. And then he was my connector to you, and you guys exposed me to this project, the vision that you had. And it was a vision at that time. It was still a vision of where you wanted to take it. And something inspired me. I saw that you guys were moving on and had some ideas. Didn't quite understand them 100%, but I wanted to kind of hitch up with you guys and evaluate it. And all of a sudden, that little pilot light, that little tiny pilot light began to start to glow again. And then the excitement began.
So I know Ed Hanel, when he shared with the plan, would you share, because you said you didn't even think you were looking. Well, what were you looking at while that plan was going on?
We know this story, fun. What I would do is, because my profession was I was immersed in it, I had to have some type of a source of diversion outside of it, just to keep my brain sane, and I resulted to sports. And for some strange reason, I started playing in a senior hockey league, and I also would watch hockey, and I would also subscribe to hockey. So I know, Orrin, you were an avid Cowboys fan and followed Roger Staubach, and for me, I was a Chicago Blackhawks fan, and being from Chicago, and when my brother-in-law came to expose me with this information, Jill, my wife, was very intent, because she had a lot of respect for him and had a notepad on the table and wanted to listen to what he had to say. And just out of respect for them, I sat at the table, but I still diverted my eyes over here to the TV, and I was watching the hockey game, pretty much ignoring. Only once in a while did my wife kind of nudge my leg or tap it with her leg under the table to try to get me to draw back in. And so I don't know if I heard everything clearly, because I was watching the hockey game. And I guess the rest is a little bit of history. He kind of got us with a couple of buzzwords. He started talking about things like, what if you do the same thing you've always done for the next 5 years? What are you going to get? He said some things about, do you have some dreams? My wife and I just had come back from the Virgin Islands, and it was still fresh in my memory. And so he caught my right ear only, just the right ear. The left ear was still listening to the game.
You know, George, I've got an inside track on that story, because I can remember Ed coming back to work as an engineer. I mean, I remember at our engineering office, we were grabbing a coffee, and he said, man, I tell you, I drove all the way up to Ironwood, and I didn't even know where Ironwood, Michigan was at the time. It's 10 hours from my house. It's as far as you can go and still be in Michigan, if that gives you an idea, from my house anyhow. And so he was telling me, he said, now, my sister, she's excited, but George, I don't know. We've got a lot of work to do. He just doesn't seem excited at all. He wouldn't even pay attention. He was watching the hockey game. I couldn't even get him to pay attention. And yet, not too long after that, you started doing some reading and started listening to CDs, and you caught fire, George. I mean, it's like you grew the business pretty fast. Now it fell apart, and you grew the business fast again, and it fell apart, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But what was that spark? Okay, so clearly you had that spark inside of you, and it certainly probably wasn't during that plan, since you were watching the hockey game. What happened to you that set you on fire to where you put up 15, 20 people in your group very quickly?
You know, that is a phenomenal question, Orrin, because it brings back such clarity of that moment. And what struck me, he laid out the concept, and the concept was not only what you guys were doing currently, but what you had planned to do in the future. And it had a lot to do with vision, and it caught me. It caught me because I had never heard somebody talk about inventing something that was going to come that wasn't in existence today. I had never heard that stuff before. And all of a sudden, that night, I remember in my mind, all of a sudden, in my brain, I saw this massive community forming. And I saw myself being part of it. I actually, you know how it is, the concept you hear a lot in this industry is the dream, or, you know, what are your goals and those types of things. And it wasn't a dream or it wasn't a goal. It was a vision. I could see clearly a massive community, and in that community, it got me excited because that vision was real. It was like an advanced announcement of what was to come. And it lit me up. And all they told me to do is some simple things like, George, can you read this little information 15 minutes? And I thought, yes, I could do that. And so I read this little book, 15 minutes. I didn't want to go over, of course. I only did that much. And I remember going to work and listening to a CD, and the stuff on the CD matched the vision. It was a high-level economist that I was listening to, and it fed my and then, of course, the people I talked to, like you said, I started out fast, because I could actually discuss the vision with other people, and you could always tell if somebody got it or if somebody saw what you saw, and they would get fired up and they would get ignited, and that's how we got started. We didn't have any people skills, we didn't have any of the things that it took to really hold a community together, but we were excited and we had a vision, and that's pretty much where we started. And you lit that. You threw that gas on the pilot light, and the pilot light changed.
Now, Tony, here's a good example, because so many people are like, oh, I got in that, and yeah, I had a little bit of success, but it all fell apart. George, I want to say 3 times that I can remember, he built his group up to 20, 25 people showing up to events, and it fell back to practically nothing. George, in the process of becoming the person he is today, I want to say lost 3 organizations where pretty much any one of them would have blown out most people. So George has one of the most resilient spirits, to where he doesn't look at failure the way most people look at failure. I think that's one of his secrets, Tony. And let's dive into that, and we can kind of call out that, because if I could give one thing to everybody who's listening today, I would say get a big dream, and then be persistent in the pursuit of that dream, even through the necessary struggles and, quote, failures, which I consider learning experience. So, George, this is early. You haven't listened to hundreds of CDs at this point, or tapes, and you certainly haven't read hundreds of books at this point. How did you persist through everybody else perceiving you as a failure?
I wish we had like a canned answer for every person that listened to this, because now that we've been in partnership together for a number of years, we can easily look back and say the #1 ingredient to success is to keep going. And it's persistence. It sounds kind of smart right now, but at the time I don't think we really knew that was what it was. And so how do you get into a person to cause them to persist? And I think one of the things was I had enough, status from my profession that I thought I actually probably was somebody that had some merit to myself, and I had some, there was a reason for somebody to recognize me as an intelligent being. I wasn't, somebody who had a very low self-esteem. If anything, I was on the other end of the charts, where I probably came off maybe a little bit too arrogant, and didn't realize that, of course, because I thought, I knew what I was thinking. But what happened was I saw this vision, and it became real to me. And I actually discussed it with some of my friends. Like you said, we had a group of about 25 people, and they saw the same vision. They weren't able to hold on to that vision. We didn't really have a solid foundational system at that point that was still being pieced together. So the vision came first before the system came. And so I lost those people. But for some strange reason, and even today, I could say what the partnership is between myself and Orrin and the other leaders that we are partnered with. I can say comfortably, man, don't you know where we are going? It's not like we've arrived. Yes, we've done some very good things. Orrin is a best-selling author now and top leadership expert, and he's surrounding himself with others that are coming up and achieving because they're using the same system, and they're becoming best-selling authors and great leaders and being recognized. So this is happening. But at the time we got started, I looked at those first 25 people and I said, guys, don't you know where we're going? It's not complete yet. It's just getting started. And when they left, I scratched my head and I thought, that's not smart. Don't leave now, guys. We're just getting this thing off the ground. Can't you see where it's going to go? And so even today, I'll tell that to somebody. You know, of course, there's accolades about what we've done, yes. We're not even where we want to be. Don't you know? We're just getting started. And so don't leave now. So I guess persistence has a lot to do with vision, but I also had to learn some humility, because the reason I was blowing out those groups is, you know, I had a lot to learn about relationships, and when I first got started, nobody told me that. Orrin never hit me over the club and said, hit me over the head with a club and said, you need to read this book called How to Win Friends and Influence People, George. It's going to really help you. He never really did anything like that, but, you know, he immersed me in the stuff. But he was never over-aggressive to the point where he would deflate my ego. And so as I was reading this stuff, and then, of course, I saw Orrin change. Now, don't forget, I was watching his modelship. He began to change, too, because he was a very strong, domineering engineer, very intelligent, but I saw his personality begin to change. He began to start to serve. He began to change his demeanor. He became more humble when he was speaking to people. I didn't know what was happening to him, but I saw him change, and he was targeting things in his leadership that he needed to grow in, and that is the perfect piece that we could lead right into right now, because you were an example of change, and it helped me understand maybe I wasn't all that in a bag of chips, and I needed to learn and grow and change as well. And so I started digging in, and my mistakes became my learning field. That was my fertilization. A lot of people look at mistakes as an ego blow. You know, it deflates their self-esteem. And I guess my self-esteem was to the point where, all right, maybe I'm not all that great, but I can learn from these mistakes. And I wasn't the fastest, and I still am not the fastest to learn. But I recognize now when hardships come and failures occur, that's what leaders do. A leader will never get to a position where they encounter mistakes. In fact, I think that's the definition of leadership, isn't it? Because you're always in front of everybody else, so you're really breaking ground where the others are coming behind you. So you're always testing out the water and hitting your head against the wall to find out what door is going to open up. So I think that's the definition of leadership. So now when my head hurts, I know I'm on track.
So, I have a question, George.
Yes, Tony.
You know, as you go through this, because I know in what Orrin has told me and what he's talked to me about, and how you built and rebuilt in the beginning, you went through a lot of adversity. You had challenges, mistakes, ego issues, all this you had to deal with. But my question is it's not that the storm won't be there, because we'll always have a storm. You know, Jim Rohn talked about the set of the sail. You know, if you can adjust the sail, you can get the safe harbor. You can kind of work through things. And my question is as you were going through all these challenges, it sounds like that all the things that happen to every great leader in our profession you went through. How did you keep going? What was your perception? What was your attitude about those challenges? And how did you get through it? What really helped you get through it so that you understood that you could get through that storm, that the sun would come back out after you rebuilt it for the second time or rebuilt it for the third time?
Yeah, you know, that is such to me, that's the question that we should ask, because I look at it now and I say, I had such a high ego. I had to literally have my legs taken out from under me, because that was where I started to grow. In other words, once I hit the ground,
yep,
then I could actually start to build. And so many people, you know, they get knocked down. I guess the key is to get back up, but not get back up with the same attitude. You know, I had to learn a lot about arrogance. I had to learn a lot about, I guess one thing I had to learn a lot about was learning from other people. When I first got started, I didn't think other people had a lot to teach me.
Mm.
And I began to change my demeanor around them. So instead of coming in like a bull in a china shop where, you know, if they didn't listen the right way, I just kind of treated them like they didn't have an opinion to be heard. All of a sudden, I started to realize I could actually grow by learning from other people's experiences, and I had never done that my whole life. I had never learned from anybody. In fact, when I got into this, I was a very poor listener. I've got some little mechanisms that I use today to kick in when I begin to go back to my normal nature, which is over speaking. So when I recognize I'm over speaking, I'll ask a question, and it stops me from talking. But what happened was when I used that mechanism, I started realizing, man, I'm getting kind of smart here, because every time I stop talking, I learn something. And all of a sudden, you know, once you learn something, you start to develop that hunger to learn, because when you learn, you grow. And so all of a sudden I was like, man, here I thought I was teaching everybody everything I needed to know, and the reality was I grew more when my mouth was shut. And so there was a lot of methods that I learned, but I had to be humbled in the beginning. And I think when God took those first groups of 25 away from me, he was humbling me.
That would be humbling. Well, you know, and Orrin, you went through the same thing. You know, most people, when they see you today, Orrin, you know, they don't realize that 5-year window where you were building and building and building when you first got started. It's funny because I wish everybody could listen or could have listened to the conversation prior to the Hangout starting, because when you guys both started, and I asked George, well, how did you know Orrin was in the room? Because Orrin didn't talk. And, you know, you could tell because of the pocket protector and being an engineer. But when you think about that way back then and all that, the 5 years of doing battle, you know, being in the living rooms, growing, listening, being humbled, learning, going from one house to another. When you think about all what you went through, that's why you are where you are today. But then you continue to learn, and it compounded, just like you, George, just like Tim Marks. You know, the last Hangout we did, phenomenal story just in the last 10, 12 years. But, you know, one of the things that you talked about was these humbling experiences. What was your thinking process? And what I want everybody to gather from this is, what were you? Did you have certain books that you went to? Did you go to certain events that made a difference? What was it that helped you through those until things started to get to a point where it didn't matter? And then the second part to that question that I want to make sure that we grasp is, you talked about vision, and Orrin started off with you know, dream, and you had vision. That vision drove you and probably helped you expand your dream. But I want to talk, maybe you can define what you saw the differences were between a dream, between vision, and between goals, because sometimes that gets kind of misaligned here in the profession. Yeah,
boy, I just love your show here, because you ask such deep questions. If somebody just starts tuning into these on a regular basis, I just love it. I can't wait to see the future speakers that come on your show and what's getting ready to happen. But for me, I saw Orrin change, become a little bit more humble, and he started to become more of a servant leader than he was a positional leader. But the thing that happened was I wanted to find out where he got information to grow and develop himself. So it wasn't like I was just a clone and try to mimic him. I wanted to find out how his thinking was changed. So I started to become hungry as far as what information he was learning. And he had this one book that he started bringing up. He would come up every month, every 30 days. And this book, it was really tattered, and it had dog ears in it, and it had little things sticking out of it, and the cover was worn. And I thought, my gosh, for the last 3 months, he's brought the same book. And I started to realize that what happened with Orrin was Christ had started to come into his life and started to draw him, and it was more of that Christ-like presence in his heart that became very attractive. And it's not a manipulative thing. You have to be very careful here, because a lot of people will say, well, I'm going to start reading the Bible and build my group. And that's not how it works. I think what we start to see is a heart begins to change. And I resisted that. I thought, at first, there's no place for this type of thing in a business. Keep that distant from me. But what happened was I would go to these events and stuff, and they'd have a non-denominational church service that I felt my peer pressure was causing me to attend. But really, it wasn't the peer pressure from my friends. It was the peer pressure from the Holy Spirit. And what was happening was he had different plans, and I started being drawn into this, and it began to make sense. And through that, internally, my heart began to change. And when my heart began to change, when negative things occurred to me, it wasn't personal anymore. It was a different perspective based on Christ's presence in my life. And I think that demeanor began to show, and of course that influenced a lot of other people. A lot more people stayed and grew with me than left at that point.
Yeah,
and,
George.
Yeah.
You remember that when I gave you that first book and I said this is the most impactful book? I can't remember what year it was, but I handed you that, and I never heard you say a thing. Share that story, because I think, when God's timing works on people at different times, he may have been working on me at a certain period, but when I handed it to George, I don't think it had the same effect at that time, but later I think it did. So yeah, I love that story.
Yeah, I'll aim this camera right back there. You can see the same book is back in there. And, by the time I got that book, Orrin had risen to a fairly nice-sized leadership role, and I had really began to respect what Orrin was doing, so I really took to heart when he wrote in that inside cover, George, Merry Christmas. I could just pull out the book right now and read it to you. It says, you and Jill are growing like crazy, and I think this book is going to really help you, and this is the best book I read in this year. And I thought, wow, what a gift. To me, you couldn't ask for a better gift, right? Now, Orrin knows how to give me some good gifts, right? And so I remember reading this book. I thought, I'm going to get into this book. This is going to be it. Didn't understand a thing about it. I read that whole book. I don't think I had an underline on it. I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I put the book back on the bookshelf. And I thought, well, I won't even talk to Orrin about this book because I'd be embarrassed to tell him that I didn't understand anything about it. And I put it back in. But it was interesting. About a year later, we had this experience over that year where my heart began to change, and more of the stuff that I just told you about was happening to me. I remember I thought, looking at my bookshelf, you know how it is, we look at our bookshelves and sometimes we get up late at night and we'll pull out 4 or 5 books, and those are the books you want to review, at 2 or 3 in the morning. And I pulled this book out and I started reading it, and the craziest thing happened. Everything in the book made sense. Now, I went from a guy who nothing made sense to in that book to a point where everything made sense, dog ears, highlights. I had completely gone to a different spot from that book, and that book was a very Christ-centered book that describes how fallen man will ultimately mess up things, and it was involving how the culture gets affected in a negative way. Our society is typically going to go in a negative direction if we don't take measures to change and grow ourselves. Going back to what you were saying, Tony, about the dream and the goal, I think number one, everybody that gets around this industry, they hear those terms. The first time you get around people, they ask you those questions. A lot of times we don't know how to respond. Like, how many times do we talk about the dream in the physical therapy clinic that I'm in? But, when I was coaching, our dream was always to win the championship. And so I could project a dream for the kids. So I understood what the dream really was. But the difference between the dream and the goal is that the vision rather, the difference between the dream and the vision is they're partners in it.
Mm.
They're partners. They're hand in glove together. You can't have one without the other. But the vision is different in that it's the internal subconscious mind's image that you see. So you can actually begin to see things that are not reality yet. You can actually project your subconscious mind to what you see. That's the vision. So that's part of your dream. Your dream might be, we're going to win the championship. But the vision is the kids running on the field holding up the trophy, screaming and yelling and rolling. That's the vision. The dream was there at the beginning of the season when it was still cold and rainy and you were doing your drills at the early spring training. That was your dream. But the vision that propels you and inspires you and gives you energy and enthusiasm is what you see. And at the very moment you see those kids running with that trophy on the field, your vision becomes true. You start to see, I saw that. Now, if you can master that in your life, what a way to go. You know, what a way to live your life, inspired and enthusiastic. Of course we're going to get knocked down because we understand the process of making mistakes. But the bottom line is that vision will change your energy level from a guy who says, woe is me, I'm knocked down again, to somebody who says, I can see where I'm going. I know where I'm heading. So hopefully that makes some sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And, you know, speaking of that, because, you know, let's talk about a couple of different competencies that we, like hunger, for instance, and where that fits in. And not only, you know, hunger, but well, let's start off with hunger, because I think desire is key. You obviously had desire, you had hunger, that vision started to come about as to what your life could be like if you had learned to master this craft, and that kind of led you down that road. But let's talk about desire and belief and how your belief impacts you know, everything in your business. I mean, belief is everything in this business. I mean, I've always said it, that if God had given you a vision, and most likely in your case that's what happened, right? And I believe that's the case at least. But if he gave you a vision and you saw what your life could be in 5 years, you know, if you went to an opportunity meeting and realized that, wow, I found a wonderful vehicle, I got a great mentor, someone like Orrin, and then he said, well, look, you know, in this vision, you saw your life 5 or 10 years later, and you believed it. It's all you have to do is believe that it's real. It would happen. It will happen. You'll make it happen. And I really believe that. And I think that sometimes people need to stick around long enough to understand that will happen. But desire will keep them around long enough to where that vision will start to unfold. At least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, you said it.
You know, if we were to sum up George and just listen to what he's talking about, the vision and how it ties in the dream. It reminds me, as I was listening to you, George, of Robert Kiyosaki's book. I think it's in Cash Flow Quadrant near the end, where he talks about his 3 keys to wealth. He studied every billionaire, and he said every billionaire does 3 things. They have a long-term vision, they delay their gratification, and they utilize the power of compounding. Now let's think about those 3 through George's life. First of all, he had to have a long-term vision, because when those people were quitting on him in the early days, he couldn't understand why, because he said, yeah, it's not put together yet, but it's going to be put together. So George had the long-term vision where, again, that persistence and vision go together. If you can see the finished product, it's like they're building a new house over here, and it's going to be 14,000 square foot just outside. If I walked out, there's a 14,000. If I go look at that right now, I'd be demoralized. It's like they've got mud and they've got some bracketing. It does not look like a house. I certainly wouldn't want to move in today, because I'd be. It would not be a good thing. There's nothing there really. However, I have a long-term vision. It's interesting how people can have a long-term vision that when they start a college, they know that it's going to be 4 years or more before they complete. They get that because that's kind of programmed. Everybody else does that. But here, George, in an entrepreneurial vision, he took the long-term perspective. It's not a 2 to 5 day. It's not a 2 to 5 phone call. It's not a 2 to 5 week. It's not even really a 2 to 5 years. It's a lifetime. You have a lifetime to improve. So you got to have that long-term vision. Like, begin with the end in mind. See where you're going. And George is a master at that. In fact, I would say George has his business today because he sees the long-term vision. And so then what a leader's job is to believe that vision so strongly that you get other people to rally behind the vision that you're setting for the team. In other words, if you don't believe in your own vision, how can you expect others to rally to that vision?
Right.
How can you expect others to buy into a vision you haven't bought into? How can you sell something you haven't bought, in other words? And so George bought in, he had the vision, he bought in. Delayed gratification. The best way to read a person's mind is through their actions. Let me say that again. It's not through their words. There's so many leaders out there that are wondering why they're continually let down because you believe people on their words. Mm-hmm. You want to be a leader, then start believing people on their actions. I knew George was the leader not because he told me he was or not because he told me he was going to do something, because he started doing what he told me. Then I say, whoa, here's a magical moment. We got someone who said something and did it. Boy, you can move the world if you assemble a team of people that will actually do what they say. The world's filled with people that will say great things. How about some people who actually do great things? That's George. So you got your long-term vision. Now, the delayed gratification is people will start if you believe in a vision, you'll start sacrificing for it. If you won't sacrifice for your vision, then you don't believe. And then don't be shocked when other people don't believe you either. You might be able to fool a person once in a while, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. You have to buy in to your own vision and start sacrificing for it. You might, George used to coach and he used to do this and he used to do that. Well, he quit coaching, he quit that, and he started putting that energy into assembling the vision he saw in his head. So he had that long-term vision, delayed gratification, and here's the magic one. Here's where it all comes together. Utilize the power of compounding. George's itty-bitty growth. Add a person there, lose a person there. Add 2 people here, lose a person there. Over time, it started to compound as George's knowledge, just like he said where he read a book, it didn't make anything, but a year later, he picks up that book again, and all of a sudden it means everything. What's going on? Knowledge compounds on itself. Action compounds on itself. Belief compounds on itself. A team compounds on itself. And through the power of compounding, these incremental gains, all of a sudden you go from going from 1 to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8, 8 to 16. All of a sudden you start getting from 10 million to 20 million. The magnitude of the incremental improvements is amazingly different. Now, you don't get that until you've been compounding like George has for 20 years. Now, a lot of people, well, yeah, if I was in for 20 years, I'd do that. And you know what the answer is? No, you wouldn't, because you would have quit at year 1. Like the 25 other people that George had up there quit. There's only one George Guzzardo. What made him different? Because he had the power of the dream to stay true to the long-term vision, to delay his gratification for it, and to utilize the power. So we have another champion on the phone call today because he took the 3 things that billionaires do, and he's done it for 20 years, and I'm totally stoked for what's going to happen in the next 20 years in George Guzzardo's life as he applies those principles of long-term vision, delayed gratification, and utilizing the power of compounding.
Well, I know we're moving towards the end of this, Orrin, and as you've been going through this, the words keep coming to me. Without a vision, people will perish. We know those words. They've come from the greatest book that's ever been written. But as I listen to this, and as I'm part of this, I think the theme for this hangout would be George Guzzardo had a vision, and the people flourished. Okay, think about that. And that's exactly what happened. But what I'm excited about these belief systems, and every great leader we've had on the Hangouts, or every great leader that we've had time with, their belief system became so strong due to reading the right books, listening, going to the events, doing those things that drove the behaviors to continue to do more of them, and they changed and grew, and then boom, they flourished. And that compounding effect just grew them tremendously. And so this belief, there's this direct connection between belief and driving your behaviors, and that's why it's so important to be plugged in, like a 110 outlet in your house, being plugged in to the mentorship, the events, the calls, the leadership hangouts, everything you can. If your support line says to you, look, you need to be listening to this, reading to this, the ones that believe will do it. See, we don't go, well, I don't know if I'll get to it someday. We do it. But by doing it, compounding, as you just said so eloquently, I mean, no one I've ever heard has said it better. That is what is so beautiful about our profession. This isn't about just selling a product. It's not about just recruiting people. It's about who you become. It's the greatest personal development system in the history of the free world, in my opinion. And I am so proud to be associated with you and George. It's been such a privilege having you on the Hangout. And Orrin, I don't know if we know what's going on for the next Hangout. I know you and I have been talking about some different guests and different subjects and all, but we'll have another one coming up soon. I'm going to turn it over to you so we can finish up this Hangout. Thanks again for both of you. God bless you.
Well, I can't encourage you guys enough that are listening to pursue your dream. You get a calling that's big enough. Get your long-term vision in place. Be willing to delay your gratification and utilize the power of compounding, and you'll be another guest like George Guzzardo. George, thank you for sharing so much. This is HBRN Leadership Factory, over and out.
See you guys soon.
Good night. Thank you, Tony.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Orrin.